You're in seat 14A. The plane is still taxiing. You're staring out the window at that upturned tip at the end of the wing, the one that bends skyward like someone folded it by mistake. That bend saves the airline $200,000 a year on fuel, per plane, every year. So why is it there? How does a bent piece of metal at the end of a wing save 6 figures a year? The answer takes you back to 1897, to a British engineer nobody listened to, a NASA researcher who spent 37 years making aircraft faster, and a flock of soaring birds who solved this problem tens of millions of years ago. The wingtip wasn't a flaw, it was a tax. The winglet just found a way to pay less. Look at that wing through the window again. From the cabin, it's just a shape. What you're actually looking at is 120 years of argument, a fight between physics and economics that nobody in a seat ever had to care about. Before February 9th, 1989, 0 commercial aircraft had that upturned curve. The 737 Classic, the 747-100, the DC-10. All of them flew with flat, blunt tips because nobody had proven it was worth changing. The transition happened so incrementally that passengers never noticed. A curve appeared. Fuel bills fell. Nobody asked why. Here's the problem the winglet actually solves. A wing generates lift because air pressure below is higher than air pressure above. Simple enough. But at the very tip of the wing, that pressure difference creates a gap, and high-pressure air doesn't stay where you put it. It spills. It rolls around the tip from bottom to top, curling into a slow, invisible tornado that trails behind the aircraft for miles. That vortex isn't just wasted energy. It's actively working against you. It tilts the lift vector slightly backward, converting force that should push the aircraft up into force that drags it backward instead. Engineers call it induced drag. Pilots call it a fuel bill. The faster you fly, the worse it gets. Unless you're flying so fast, you break other rules entirely. At the cruise altitudes most commercial jets operate, induced drag is responsible for roughly a third of total aerodynamic drag. Solving it took 80 years, and the first person to try failed for exactly the right reasons. Ask anyone what a winglet does, and they'll say, oh, it reduces drag. That's half true. And the half that's missing is the more interesting part. A winglet doesn't just block the vortex like a wall, it does something more subtle. It extracts a small forward thrust from the vortex's own energy. The vortex wraps around the tip and creates a localized crosswind at that exact location. A properly shaped winglet stands in that crosswind like a sail tacking against a side wind. It converts what was pure loss into a tiny, useful forward component. It's not recapturing the energy cleanly. Thermodynamics doesn't allow miracles. But it's turning a leak into a tax deduction, which is a very different thing from plugging the leak entirely. That's why the better framing for a winglet is harvest, not block. But that raises a harder question. If this was discoverable, and it was, why didn't every commercial aircraft have it from day one? Frederick W. Lancaster, London, 1897. He was the first person in history to propose and patent a device at the wingtip to manage this exact problem. He called it an end plate, a vertical fin bolted to the tip of a wing. The idea was correct. If air can't spill around the end, you can't get the vortex, and you can't get the induced drag. There was one problem. His end plate was flat, and a flat plate creates its own drag, viscous drag, from every square inch of surface area moving through air. At the speeds and wing designs of 1897, the new drag from the plate arrived faster than the induced drag reduction disappeared. Net result, nearly nothing. Lancaster published 2 books, Aerodynamics in 1907, Aerodynetics in 1908. He co-developed what became the Lancaster-Prandtl lifting line theory, still used in aerodynamics today. The community accepted his math and ignored his hardware. He had the right idea. He had the wrong shape. That single distinction cost aviation 80 years. Richard T. Whitcomb, born 1921. He graduated from WSSter Polytechnic Institute in 1943 and walked into NACA's Langley Research Center on one condition: Put me in aerodynamics, not propulsion, not structures, aerodynamics. He got what he wanted. And over the next 37 years, he handed aviation 3 inventions that changed the shape of every aircraft flying today. First, the area rule, 1952. The discovery that aircraft transitioning through the sound barrier needed to be shaped like a wasp's waist, a Coke bottle, or they'd shatter. It earned him the 1954 Collier Trophy. Second, the supercritical wing, developed 1967 to 1969. A redesigned wing profile that let aircraft fly more efficiently just below the speed of sound. NASA awarded him $25,000 for it. Third, the winglet, 1976, published as NASA Technical Note D8260. A design approach and selected wind tunnel results at high subsonic speeds for wingtip-mounted winglets. He didn't build it because it was elegant. He built it because 1973 happened. The Arab oil embargo made fuel expensive overnight. Whitcomb's abstract curiosity about induced drag became the most urgent engineering problem in civil aviation. Between 1977 and 1979, the KC-135 test program ran 48 flights with winglets mounted. The winglets bent almost into a half circle from the vortex forces acting on them. They held, and they delivered a 7% improvement in lift-to-drag ratio, a 7% increase in range. NASA later credited Whitcomb's combined contributions as fully 1/3 of the most important technological accomplishments of the Langley Research Center since its inception in 1917. But the military proved it. Commercial aviation still hadn't moved. That would take someone with a billionaire's broken jet. Before we get to Seattle, we need to stop in the sky above the Serengeti, because the best aerodynamicist in history isn't at NASA. It's 65 million years of pressure-tested evolution. Watch a soaring eagle at altitude, or a stork, or an Andean condor. Look at the tips of their wings. The primary feathers at the wingtip don't lie flat. During flight, they flex upward and separate into individual slots, each feather acting as its own small surface, fanned apart like an open hand. This is a margination, and it's not incidental to the feather design, it's the point of it. Each individual slot spreads the tip vortex into multiple smaller vortices instead of one large one. Smaller vortices dissipate faster and carry less energy penalty. In 2022, Brett Kayla Sen Van O.R. Schoot at the University of Montana ran particle image velocimetry tests, essentially high-speed airflow photography, confirming that wings with emarginated primary feathers produce measurably better lift-to-drag ratios than equivalent smooth-edged wings. Two completely separate evolutionary processes arrived at the same answer. Birds got there tens of millions of years ago through natural selection. Richard Whitcomb got there in 1976 through wind tunnels and a financial crisis. Neither knew the other had solved it. The physics didn't care. Here's what that means for seat 14A. The shape you've been staring at out that window is what physics demands. Not a design choice anyone got to make. When you need to fly efficiently on fixed-length wings, physics has one answer, and eventually everything smart enough, feathers or metal, finds it. But knowing the physics and building a product from it are entirely different problems. Someone still had to make it pay. Seattle, 1991. Joe Clark, pilot, engineer, entrepreneur, co-founds Aviation Partners Inc. with Dennis Washington, a copper mining billionaire with a specific frustration. His Gulfstream II couldn't fly from Los Angeles to New York without stopping to refuel. Washington had the money to do something about it. Clark had the idea. They assembled what insiders called a dream team. Retired Boeing engineers, led by Dr. Lewa Bernie Gratzer, former chief aerodynamicist at Boeing. Their target was an incremental improvement. It was Whitcomb's winglet, but solved. Whitcomb's version worked. But its 90-degree junction where the winglet met the wing created its own interference drag. Gratzer's innovation was simple. Eliminate the hard angle. Curve the transition smoothly from wing to winglet. No junction, no interference. The blended winglet. They retrofitted Washington's Gulfstream too. Then, to prove it publicly, pilot Clay Lacy flew it on a world speed record campaign in 1995. The record stood. The product had its advertisement. In 1997, Boeing business jets made blended winglets standard equipment. Then came Paris. At the 1999 Paris Air Show, Clark signed a deal to retrofit 10,200 Boeing commercial aircraft with blended winglets. That $200,000 per plane per year figure wasn't marketing copy. It was the number airlines were calculating on their own. Payback period, 2 to 3 years, on a $750,000 retrofit. Some operators paid it back in under 2. By the time Joe Clark died on March 30th, 2020, at age 78, more than 6,000 Boeing aircraft wore his winglets. The cumulative fuel saving had crossed 10 billion gallons. That's a business story with physics as the product. There's one more piece. The upturned tip you've been looking at your whole life is only half the device. On February 6, 2014, the FAA granted a supplemental type certificate for a new configuration, the split scimitar winglet. United Airlines was the launch customer, the addition. A downward-pointing ventral strake below the wing, angled opposite to the main winglet above. Because the vortex wraps in both directions, both above and below the wingtip, the single upturned element was only catching half of it. The split scimitar catches the rest. Additional drag reduction, 1.6 to 2.2% per flight, over the already improved blended winglet. On a single 737-800, that's an extra 45,000 gallons a year. You cannot see the ventral strake from seat 14A. It's beneath the wing, out of the window's frame. You've been watching the antenna while the radio was below your feet. And then there's the answer to the question the winglet raises. What if you didn't need it at all? The 777 and 787 have no winglets. They use raked wingtips, swept span extensions that aerodynamically outperform vertical winglets when you're not constrained by airport gate width. The 787's rake tip delivers 5.5% drag reduction. A standard blended winglet delivers 3.5 to 4.5%. Winglets aren't obsolete. They're the right answer when the gate decides your wingspan. For narrow-body aircraft locked into 36-meter wide gates, you can't extend the span. So you extend it vertically. Same problem, different math wins. Draw the arc. In 1897, Frederick Lancaster proposes a fin at the wingtip. Right idea, wrong shape. The flat plate doesn't work, and the idea dies. In 1976, Richard Whitcomb publishes NASA TND 8260. The right shape, a vertical airfoil, not a flat wall. Proven in 48 test flights, 7% improvement. Nobody builds it commercially. In 1991, Joe Clark and Bernie Gratzer solved the last problem, the junction. Blend the curve, eliminate interference drag, sell it to Washington's Gulfstream, then sell it to Paris. In 2014, the split scimitar. They weren't done. The bottom of the vortex needed catching too. 127 years, one problem, 4 people. Progressively less wrong. The wingtip wasn't a flaw, it was a tax. The winglet just found a way to pay less. You're back in seat 14A, same window, same view. That upturned curve at the end of the wing, catching the light. You know now that it's a 127-year argument between physics and money, resolved in the specific direction that physics always wins. But only after the economics made the math urgent enough to finish. Lancaster saw it with a patent and 2 books nobody read. Whitcomb proved it in a crisis. Clark made it pay. And an engineer at Boeing added a fin underneath it in a direction you can't even see. The wingtip wasn't a flaw, it was a tax. The winglet just found a way to pay less. Next time, why passenger jets stay below 40,000 feet, even though the air up there is thinner. The engines would burn less fuel, and the physics says go higher. The answer involves a trade-off nobody talks about.